Here we are, Life in Stages. I'm Joel Greenberg, and today we are going to be speaking with and listening to and having a conversation with Allen MacInnis. And I met Allen when he was in Toronto, but it took him a while to get here. I mean, he has moved his way across the country from the west to the east, and that's some of what we're going to talk about. But I think I'll let Allen sort of speak for himself. Hi, Allen.
Hello.
Yeah.
West to east.
Yeah.
I used to wear it as a badge of honor that I had a career without living in Toronto.
Yes.
Then I had to take that badge off when I moved here.
Yeah. Well, I certainly remember more than one time, not with you, but with people who had moved here, Toronto was the city that you love to hate because it wasn't where you were from, and it wasn't necessarily where you wanted to be. But if you wanted to work, this tended to be where you felt you had to be for a while, at least.
Yes.
Some people moved back to where they were from, and some people stayed. So I'd like to begin by asking you if the fact that you have had a long and rich career in the theater, did this begin from childhood? I mean, was there family influence? Was this an activity that you grew up with, or did you find it elsewhere?
I found it after high school, pretty much.
Okay.
In school and especially in high school, music was my thing.
Okay.
I was a bassoon player.
Right.
And when I think about this tall, scrawny kid playing a tall, scrawny bassoon, it sort of made sense. And visual art was also something that I dabbled in, but it was music that I was most interested in.
Okay.
And just before I finished high school, I was playing in a small community orchestra, and I was really outclassed in it. I shouldn't have been there. I wasn't good enough to be there. But with that and finding musicians not being my people, at least classical musicians, in junior high school and high school, I became something of a social activist. The priest at my church was a very, very progressive and really active kind of guy, and I was turned on to all kinds of social activist, lefty kind of things. And so the musicians in that orchestra were nothing like that, and I felt like I wasn't among my people.
Right.
When was that?
No, where was this? Where were you?
This was in Edmonton. I grew up in Edmonton. I was born there.
Yeah.
Went to the University of Alberta, and when I went to the U of A, I started intending to be a social worker.
Right.
And I took a drama class for easy credits, really.
Yeah.
More because I didn't have to write any papers, and everything else had a lot of papers.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this will be fun to do. My sister was into the arts. She desperately wanted to become an actor and was pursuing that, and that seemed like fun. And I really took to it, and I really liked it. And I switched in my second year to become a drama teacher, because the idea of being an actor was entirely remote to me in Edmonton in 1975. It just never occurred to me that you could do that.
Right.
And so I finished that, and I was a junior high school teacher before I auditioned for the Vancouver Playhouse Acting School.
Okay.
In part because I really did want to go back to theater. When I was in university, we had created Catalyst Theater, which is still running now.
Yeah.
At that time, it was a theater using devised methods to create performances for various clients or intentions. And I wanted to do better at that work. So I thought I'll go and get better at acting and come back to Catalyst and we'll do better work. But I also wanted to go to Vancouver because my partner, who I'm still with at the time, wanted desperately out of Edmonton.
I see. Okay.
So, and he wanted to go to Vancouver. And I
Okay.
said, well, if I can get into theater school there, then
Yeah.
we'll go. And I got in.
And did you go
Uh,
back to Catalyst?
I did eventually,
Uh-huh.
but of course, at the Vancouver Playhouse, I discovered the whole world of theater, and in many ways, discovered that the things I wanted to do in the theater, which was change the world,
Mm-hmm.
were possible in so many other kinds of work,
Okay. Yeah.
and that connection broadened and opened up, and had costumes. and, and sets and
Yes.
wonderful
Yeah.
things and wonderful people too. The Playhouse was a very, very unique program. We were incredibly lucky.
Yeah. Well, we've had, in the first series of this podcast, Sarah Ornstein talked quite a bit about what being at the Playhouse was like and how unique it was as a theater training ground. And,
Absolutely.
And in this series, Korean Koslow was talking about it as well.
My classmate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, no, and I remember, of course, it stopped at, I don't know exactly when it stopped, but really sad that a program that was so unique, and the people that I know who went through it, who had who gained so much by being there. I'm sure you're aware that theater training now, and conversations about theater training then and now, there's a lot of the controversy of what the old school training had been like, and how some people could survive it and benefit, and others felt that they had been really damaged by the behavior, by the time. Ted Dykstra was talking also about, when he was at the National Theatre School, the range of experiences that people had. Some people who were really able to take on or not be bullied, and that seems to be what it was. What was your experience at the Playhouse like?
Well, they designed it to self-destruct every 2 years. Did you know that?
No.
They took one class for 2 years. And so at the end of 2 years, they could decide this isn't working and close it down, and we don't owe anybody anything.
Wow.
And that was very intentional from the beginning, at least. No, I think it was actually true all the way through.
Right.
When Powys Thomas and Christopher Newton founded it. And I was in the third class, so I guess it started I started in 79.
Okay.
So I think it started 4 years before that. And it was one room, and the teachers came to us. There were two full-time teachers. David Latham was the director of the school, and Jojo Rideout was our voice teacher in the first year, and in the second year, Christine Willis was our voice teacher. And then everybody else came to us. They brought people from England. They brought people from around Canada. Paddy Crean was our fencing teacher. And he came for a 3-week session. When I think about the privilege that was for the 12 of us, 12 students, that's it. I would say that the rigor that they provided to us was also an incredibly safe environment.
Okay.
And it was demanding for sure, but I suppose that kind of demand was out in the profession. The school was associated with the Vancouver Playhouse Theatre Company, and so we were very close to the demands of the profession. And that's what they were trying to, I guess, model in the school, that you're going to have to work hard at this. And I felt like there was a real I guess, understanding that not everybody, no matter how talented you are,
Mhm.
really has the ability to survive the precarity of this life pursuit.
Yeah.
It takes a lot. It costs a lot,
Mhm.
and it's fickle.
Yeah.
And there will be things about your talent that will get you somewhere, but there will also be things about your looks
Mhm.
that will help or hinder you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it felt like they were going to do their very best with this group of people they've selected
Yep.
to equip you the very best that they can.
Okay.
In my experience, we didn't have a lot of cuts.
Mhm.
We started with 13 and essentially graduated 11.
Great.
Um, uh, so it wasn't like we were living with a threat of the axe
Yeah.
coming down. And I think that that was the case at a number of other schools that took in somewhat larger classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of that anxiety, I think a lot of actors had a really tough time at the theater school, but we didn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so weird. I mean, there is the reality that the class, the first year class that you take in has had, you've either auditioned, probably a combination of auditions, maybe interviews, maybe group work, whatever the criteria are for assessing. And it's like, in a way, like you've been cast in this school, and it's true you can't predict how people will develop or how quickly, and if a class of students, whether it's 12 or 20, whatever the number is, whether they can move sort of as a unit, but understanding that everybody's going to be moving at a different pace, or absorbing things, and then to tell people that it's time to go. It's like you're being fired, right? It's
Yeah.
that isn't. I mean, occasionally, and horribly, sometimes an actor is released from a contract, but it's, at least in my experience, that's rare. I mean,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it just seems so antithetical to put people through the rigors of auditioning for this school when you're so young, and you're so passionate, you hope, and maybe even desperate to just be in that world. And then, and I can only imagine if the philosophy is, and I know that many schools had this, where, at the end of the year or at the end of each term, you are assessed and told whether you're worthy and whether you'll be back, whether you won't be back, as though, it's sort of past. I mean, it's decisions made by other people.
Yeah. I really have two minds about it, because I completely agree. And I remember an experience at National Theatre School when I was doing a lot of teaching there, and I was in on an assessment of the current, I think, first year class.
Right.
And I remember a lot of conversation about a young woman who was really struggling and very, you could see her resistance.
Yes.
But I remember saying at the time, is it not us? Are we not getting her, and not the other way around? And that was my first insight into, oh, yes, she's definitely fighting, and to some extent not giving in, as you really do need to yield.
Yeah.
And I don't mean yield to abuse or
Sure.
manipulation, but yield to the work. But at the same time, I thought maybe we aren't getting her, and we haven't figured out how to let her in. But I do think that, and I've seen it in many circumstances where I've taught, if the class is too big, and this is the biggest problem altogether, you don't have enough contact time with everybody. And so people are struggling, and they're not getting the help they need, because there's too many people in the room for one instructor, maybe two if you're lucky, but more often than not, one instructor to give them the kind of time. And it's also like group dynamics, that if the balance isn't right, people actually pull the quality down,
Hmm.
not lift it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I taught for a few years at a Toronto conservatory school that, where the administration, and it wasn't, I wasn't there for very long because the administration kept saying, you've got to take in more students, take in more students. I said, you're saying that as though, first of all, as though there are appropriate students, fighting to get in here. There are not.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the attrition rate is already, remarkably high in first year because a number of the students who are here, they're right out of high school. Many of them are on their own for the first time. So the mix of their personal development and being in these classes for some was just lethal. It's just they were going crazy, and so that the drive there was there have to be more. You need more students. I said, well, actually, you don't. And exactly what you're saying was the case, and especially in first year,
Yeah. Hmm.
it's
It was part of the design at the Playhouse that the students be older.
Yes.
They and it didn't remain entirely true all the time. There was a 17-year-old in my first class, or my class in the first year, and she stayed all the way through. But most of the classes came in as young people who were in their early 20s. I was 23.
Yeah.
I'd already been a school teacher.
Yeah.
I think Jimmy Mison was almost 30. Tom Macbeth, the same. Grown-up people who were kind of ready and mature enough to take on the rigors and the demands of it.
Oh, for sure.
Sarah, I think, was certainly 20, I would think, when she started.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I was in, I know the national, I wasn't at the National Theatre School, but when I was in school in Montreal, I know that the National Theatre School did not accept students directly from high school. And it was, I'm sure, a very similar philosophy that with the work is so hard, and having a degree of maturity and also experience, experience being on your own, beginning to know who you are before you get so completely, you can so easily get so messed up, being told who you should be, what you should be, how you should be. Okay, so
it's funny you say that because there was a teacher at the National Theatre School who I won't name, who had the opposite, who said we need to get them right out of high school before somebody else ruins them. And when I look at the way he trained people, I went, oh, well, yes, that's because you want to cast them in precisely a mold you have for actors.
Right.
You're not so much interested in their particular talent. You want them to be a particular kind of actor.
Yeah.
But we see the range of it. And right now we see many, many schools that take in very, very big first-year classes. I think NTS might be the last one to take in a class that's less than 20 people.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a lot of people out there looking for work at the end of the day.
Well, I know. I mean, in Toronto, I've had this conversation with a couple of guests that, the world of theater in Toronto cannot support the number of theater programs that are in and around the city. It's not fair, because students, when they graduate, are, they're not being, it feels to me that they're not really being given the full story. That, you're going to be one of however many, the aggregate of all the students who are graduating from these various programs. Good luck. I mean, it's just not there.
It's true. And I would say that part of that was that programs had to proliferate so that the diversity of students could expand. And so in some ways I think of it as my generation's fault for not starting much earlier to find diversity in every class in the 80s and 90s, instead of having to wait for other programs to proliferate that did.
Right.
And now across all of them, there's a lot more diversity and access for people who want it. But it results in this enormous number of graduates every year for, as you say, not nearly enough work to employ them all.
Right. So, okay. So I'm curious. I mean, I know you as a director, as an artistic director, as a teacher. Were you an actor?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Right out of, I was one of the lucky ones to be taken into the Playhouse as a season right out of theater school. Okay. So two of us were invited to be in the my first season out of theater school. So I did 5 shows with them.
Right.
Pamela Rabe was the other one. Do you know Pamela Rabe?
No. I mean, I know the
Pamela
name.
Rabe.
Yeah.
Pamela from Vancouver. She was a classmate. She eventually fell in love with and married Roger Hodgman, who was the artistic director of the Vancouver Playhouse following Christopher, and moved with him to Australia. And now she's an enormous star in Australia.
Right.
Huge,
like
huge.
Yeah.
But Pam and I, Pam was wonderful for me to act with because we could look at each other eye to eye because she was almost 6 feet tall. And we did a variety of things in that season. We did get this. You probably heard of this, The Notebook of Trigorin. Did you ever hear of that?
Yes.
Yeah, Tennessee Williams' adaptation of The Seagull. Right. The season before, when we were students, we'd done his other play, Red Devil Battery Sign.
Okay. So
in both cases, we got to work with the man himself.
Wow.
And I think back on that and think, how funny, how odd, what a strange stroke of I don't know what.
Yeah.
And then we did, I met Rolly Hugel and Francis Hyland in a production of Wings by Arthur Coppett.
Yeah.
Just a variety of a season at a typical, I guess somewhat not quite typical regional theater.
Yeah.
And then I went on tour. Corinne and I went on tour in Saskatchewan for Persephone Youth Theater. I worked at a number of places in the West. She and I ended up in a show at the National Arts Center in the band because she plays keyboard and I play a bunch of instruments.
And the bassoon?
We were, no, I didn't play the bassoon. By then I didn't even own one, but I played the clarinet.
All right.
And glockenspiel and a bit of flute, and they split a drum kit between us. And so I played boom and she played chicka. So it was boom, chicka, boom, chicka. It was an absurd, extraordinary piece by Susan Cox called Valentine Brown, A Tribute to a Superstar. And we'd met Susan when we were students.
Okay.
She came and directed us at the Playhouse. And we did her Las Vegas version of a Valentine Brown, A Tribute to a Superstar, where she's the only actor on stage and she plays all the parts herself, including the chorus line with dolls attached to her on either side. It was absurd, very funny. And that was at National Theatre School, at National Arts Center.
Right.
And I remember us we found a phone that you could phone long distance anywhere in the country. So nightly we would phone to the West, which, hadn't quite shut down, and look for work. And I got a job at Western Canada Theatre in Kamloops, doing something, which oddly led to me meeting Michael Dobbin. Who was the artistic director there, but he was moving to Alberta Theatre Projects. And out of the blue, he called me and asked me if I would become his associate artistic director to finish out somebody else's contract.
Okay.
So Aaron and I were suddenly moving from Vancouver to Calgary, and I was associate artistic director there. And I had started some directing. I'd done some stuff for White Rock Summer Theatre, which I had done 3 seasons at as an actor.
Right.
But Patty Armstrong, who was running it, couldn't carry on with directing a show, We Won't Pay,
Oh yeah.
and asked me to take over, and I did. And I went very quickly through this period of acting and directing,
Right.
and pretty much by the time I got to Calgary, I was focused on directing. I did act in Calgary in one show. I remember Christopher Newton saying to me, "Be careful, if you don't do both, you will only do one." And he was right, because very quickly I didn't have time to act, because the acting contracts were too long. But I loved it. I loved acting. And I think it completely informed how I direct.
So I guess the transition from acting to directing was not I mean, it wasn't, you didn't lay out a choice and say,
no,
I choose.
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I think I knew that I wanted to. And I think that if I had a weakness as an actor, it was that I had a tendency to look at the big picture. And I think perhaps sometimes didn't hone in on, okay, but this is your path. This is your part in it. And you're worrying or wondering about the bigger picture. And that might be getting in your way. And so I suppose I totally think now that I ended up doing what I'm best suited for. But I still loved acting, and I think, I'd love to go back to it. In fact, I'm telling the whole world I want to act again.
Well, everybody
and then waiting for something to happen, as though it will.
Everybody who's listening, you can reach Alan. No, I mean, it's similar to, I started as, I knew I was going to be an actor. I mean, from a very, very young age. That's the only thing that I saw for myself until I was in school, learning how to do that. And in my last year, I realized that I was enjoying rehearsing much more than I was enjoying performing. And I liked performing. I just didn't feel that I needed it the way I had thought I would. And that was pretty shocking, but I think that's when I realized that even though I continued doing both, it was clear that wasn't, I knew where I was happiest, and I knew where I felt probably most fulfilled. And the thing with acting for me that was professionally that I realized wasn't good was as soon as I was hired to do something, I was immediately wondering what was next. And so I clearly felt a lack of security, but I was too busy not being being fully immersed in what it was I was doing at the moment and wondering what was going to happen when that ended. So I'm glad that I was able to find an alternative way of working.
I loved performing as much as rehearsing. I loved the nightly "How will this go tonight?" But the training that we had at the Playhouse was so focused on live performance. And they called it ensemble training. I don't think people use that term anymore. But it was such an emphasis on each other's reliance, our reliance on each other, and the fact that however we have rehearsed this, we know it's not going to go exactly as rehearsed, and that's the point. And that letting the audience in on that, and actually using their presence as another factor in the way that this goes, is exactly how we were trained. And I loved that about performing, and it's the thing that I rehearse for. I think I might sometimes make stage managers a bit crazy because they'll say, "Well, is she going to do that?" And sometimes the answer is, "Well, sometimes."
Yeah.
but maybe not all the time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you direct and others stage manage.
That's right, I guess.
Yeah. Uh, okay. So you're in the West.
Yeah, I'm in the West.
And you're going to. And when do you move to Winnipeg to Prairie Theatre Exchange?
I think it's my generation. I was extremely lucky to work across the country.
Yeah.
People would ask me, Susan Furley asked me to direct in Regina. I'd known Susan in Vancouver for a brief period. She was sort of apprenticing with Chris Newton. Linda Moore hired me sight unseen, but she had talked to Morris Podbury about a show that I'd done for him at Centaur. And so she hired me to do a show at Neptune, and that led to a number of shows with them.
Okay.
So and Aaron was prepared to go anywhere.
Right.
For 4 years, we didn't have an apartment. We just went job to job because I could, with that sort of support system, I could say yes to everything.
Sure.
And I said yes to things I had no business directing.
Like
what? Oh,
come on.
I probably had absolutely no business directing The Merry Widow. And that's because this is the first time I just confess this publicly.
Okay.
I had never attended in my life an opera performance at that point. I did by the time I got to direct the show. I went to see Ariadne Afnaxis. Found it bewildering. But, The Merry Widow is not really an opera. It's a musical, really, and it had a script. And so I messed around with the script and did with it what I would do with a musical. And Mary J. Johnson, who played the widow, said at the opening night, I have never in my life gone through a rehearsal process where I am imitating her real accent, where the director didn't throw a hissy fit, and you just didn't throw a single hissy fit. I thought, well, if I ever direct another one, I will certainly never throw one. Just because I'm going to make that my mark. But I only did another one, which was actually a great pleasure to do. And I loved opera. I just never attended it.
Sure.
I liked to listen to it as an art form to watch. At that time, I didn't find it all that interesting. Yes, I got to do all these kinds of things all over the place. And Chris Newton was asking me to the Shaw Festival fairly frequently. So getting to Winnipeg, I had directed there on a freelance contract. When Kim McCaw left, I applied for the job. I interviewed for it. I didn't get it. Thank God, because I went on to do some other really great projects that I might not have been able to do if I had, at that time, taken the job.
Sure.
But when the job came up again, eventually they asked me to apply. And I showed the material to Aaron, and he said, "This looks like you. I think you should think about it." And I said, "But do you want to live in Winnipeg?" And he said, "Not really. But if we could finally have a house, maybe that would be fun." So I took the job. I did there what I ended up doing at Young People's Theatre in Toronto. I took the job with a whole year's worth of freelance work to do during my first year as artistic director. So it was kind of nuts. I went whenever I could, but I had to finish a bunch of other projects that I felt I couldn't walk away from.
Sure.
But I look back on that and think, wow, that's actually really great. Because you can't direct any shows there. You have time to just listen and get to really get to know the place without all of the responsibilities. Of course, it's a burden on the other people. I should think about the poor general managers who had to tolerate that nonsense. But it was a great way to get to know Winnipeg and Prairie Theatre Exchange, and I ended up loving Winnipeg. It's still a favorite city of mine.
I worked in Winnipeg a couple of times in the early 90s, and I was absolutely struck by how friendly and how welcoming, it was. In strong contrast to Toronto, that there weren't many companies, but I wrote or called people before I was going to Winnipeg, say, I'm going to be here. And the response often was, well, we know you're coming, and we're really looking forward to seeing you. I said, I don't know this experience. That was not Toronto.
No.
And it was
when I left Winnipeg and came to Toronto and we held a press conference, I said, well, where are the cameras?
Right.
Because in Winnipeg, there'd be 5 and a whole lot of people, and it would be like a 90-minute, 2-hour affair.
Yeah.
And I came to Toronto, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, no. And so Prairie Theatre Exchange, a lot of original material, and probably a very wide, I would think, a really wide audience range. I mean, and education as well, right?
Yeah. A big attraction for me to the company was that it had this enormous school.
Yeah.
And that actually PT was founded as a school. It was it was really the Manitoba Theatre Centre's drama school separated.
Okay.
The company didn't want to run it anymore, but they didn't want it to die.
Right.
And a number of parents formed a board and created the Manitoba Theatre Workshop, which became Prairie Theatre Exchange. But they kept the school. And by the time I got there, the school was for kids, teens, and adults. And it was an official teaching center of the University of Manitoba. So there were classes that we offered that were credit at the University of Manitoba. So it was huge. And we were in a downtown mall, which people were horrified by. I mean, a theater in a mall, good God. But we had 42,000 square feet. We had 3 classrooms. We rented office space to the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra and to several other small theaters. We had a big theater space, a thrust theater space, rehearsal hall. It was enormous and active and remarkable in so many ways.
Well, the 2 shows that I did there was for Winnipeg Jewish Theatre, and it was before Winnipeg Jewish Theatre. I think they now are sort of based at the JCC. I'm not sure where that is, but the 2 shows I did with Winnipeg Jewish Theatre were at Prairie Theatre Exchange in Portage Place, and I had been to Winnipeg the first time, actually doing some replacement casting for a young people's theatre tour, and that was in the original PTE space.
On Princess Street in the Heritage Building.
It was. It was quite
falling apart around you.
God, it was something else. But when we were there, I remember meeting some of the people from PT, and they said we're in the process of moving. And when I saw the space at Portage Place, it's gigantic. The shop space. I said, and I do remember and Kim was the artistic director at the time, I think. And I remember him saying, when performances begin, the ushers really need to be well trained, because you will see audience members will stroll in from any number of access points, and it's a slightly disorienting space. And sure enough, during performances, people would, just amble in and out.
And the actors exiting down a vom could encounter somebody coming back from the washroom.
That's right.
Who might say to you, this is going really well.
But an extraordinarily welcoming city. And a city that maybe, a friend of mine who lived and worked in Chicago for a long time, said that he felt that Winnipeg was parallel to Chicago in that, he said, a Midwest city that is somewhat isolated, that will take care of itself. And when you realize, when you really do take in the size of Winnipeg and the capacity of what that city has of its own, is really, I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah. And cities, a similar city as Minneapolis, cold cities.
Yes, yeah.
Where the population know you need to go out or you will die from isolation.
Right.
And the busiest year, at least certainly when I was there, the busiest year for the arts was January.
Right.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Everybody had something on. Yeah. Lots of incredibly creative things. I don't know if they're still running it, but the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra did their new music festival in January. Right. Packed with people. And some of the most obscure stuff you could imagine. Yeah. I went to a concert where there were 3 separate string quartets in 3 locations in the space. One in the balcony on the left, one in the balcony on the right, one backstage. Right. And they were playing 3 absolutely distinct pieces all at once. Okay. But it was conceived, and it was quite an extraordinary oral experience.
Yeah.
It's a city that the on the whole, the audience feel the need for, I guess you'd say art, but I would also say it's more about getting out and gathering for something exciting, something interesting, something that is outside the realm of work or church.
Yes, yeah. And how you were in Winnipeg for how long?
7 years. And I continued to freelance while I was there, which was a great privilege. Not a lot, but it was there actually that I was doing most of the teaching and directing at National Theatre School, which I had started to do just before I went to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed. Yeah. And I suppose brought me back to my roots as a teacher, because when I taught for 1 year and then went off to Vancouver, and I suppose for a while thought that was kind of a wrong turn, but it wasn't, because I think I am a teacher. It's just in me. And working at the National Theatre School brought that back to me. Yeah. I think now I think of myself as a directing teacher, in that I like to slow down the process. That's really what I'm doing when I'm teaching directing. I'm just expanding and slowing down the process. And I love it. It's important to me.
Yeah. And was the move from Winnipeg to Toronto, was that did you move here directly from PTE?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was I was asked to apply for, at the time, Lorraine Kimsa Theatre for Young People.
Right.
And I came and, actually I was planning to leave Prairie Theatre Exchange and go back to freelancing. I felt like, you stay too long at a place and there will always be some people that you just haven't hired because you don't connect to them, but they ought to be working there. It's just you haven't connected to them.
Yes.
And I thought it's important that I move along. And this is a great job and somebody else should have it. And so I intended to do that. And then the phone rang and I was asked to apply for the job. And I thought, start typing a thing saying, well, if you took me, this is what I'd want to do.
Right.
And it certainly did appeal to me. I had done a fair amount of theater for young audiences. And Young People's Theatre was a bigger company than Prairie Theatre Exchange in terms of budget. I knew it was a company that was in a bit of trouble with having changed the name, having lost some of its audience. I think perhaps some of its artistic reputation had stumbled.
Yeah.
I don't think every show, but there was something
Hmm.
a little bit shaky,
Hmm.
it seemed,
Yeah.
about the place.
Yeah.
And I suppose that didn't scare me. And I thought, well, if I just tell them what I'm interested in,
Yeah. Yeah.
they'll know whether or not I'm the right person to
Right.
hire. And then they did hire me, and then I had to say, well, it's going to take me a year
Hmm.
to leave Prairie Theatre Exchange, and I also, as it happens, have a bunch of freelance work
Yeah.
on my plate
Yeah.
that I can't just walk away from now.
Sure. Sure.
So that was my first year at running two theaters at once.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then I didn't move to Toronto for a year. We were
Uh-huh.
still in Winnipeg,
Okay.
and then finally landed
Yeah.
in Toronto about almost a year from being appointed.
Okay. Okay.
And again, the opportunity to learn more about the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, uh,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so important to have the time to understand the community that you are going to be working in and with.
yeah,
And I think it's probably unusual for people to be given that opportunity where you're trying to do
yeah,
everything all at the same time, knowing you can't, it's not possible.
yeah, and
And
particularly having to make programming decisions
yeah.
that uh, to me that just is a nightmare that you're
Yeah.
making those decisions without knowing a whole lot
Hmm.
about the audience
Hmm.
that you and I suppose the how the company works.
Hmm.
But it's more than anything the audience with whom you are beginning a dialogue, because
Yeah.
that has been the way I look at it
Hmm.
from the time I was at Prairie Theatre Exchange, when I certainly confronted that there was only so much money
Yeah.
and we weren't going to be able to have 20 people on stage.
Hmm.
And it was a thrust theater. So there are some things that work in thrust and
Hmm.
some things that don't,
Right.
although I tried to challenge that as often as possible.
Hmm.
And uh, knowing that I had this real, I called it a taskmaster, the budget.
Hmm.
I was not going to be driven only by what can I afford to do.
Right.
So I gave myself another taskmaster, which was a theme for the season of work,
Right.
and
Mhm.
that we will obey that as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all of the plays in this season will
Hmm.
have a theme.
Hmm.
And I thought of it as an ongoing conversation
Yeah.
about a broad topic in the series of plays that we were
Yeah.
producing and
Yeah.
or presenting.
Yeah.
And I brought that to my work at YPT as well.
Yeah.
What is the conversation we're having with young
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. And how, like, what was that transition like for you? I mean, I guess, did you have a sense of what the theater, what YPT was, and uh, did it meet, like, did it match up with the reality?
My sense coming in
Yeah.
was that it was a main stage theater.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
closer to a regional theater
Yeah.
than many others, partly because of the size of it,
Hmm.
the size of productions,
Hmm.
the length of time that those shows ran.
Yeah.
Um, and it was transitioning and had really started the transition before I started, from a mix of evening performances for
Hmm.
families,
Hmm.
evenings and weekends,
Yeah.
and some school shows.
Hmm.
They still called them matinees, even though they
Okay.
started at 10 in the morning.
Yeah.
But it had that, oh, well,
Yes.
that's that extra thing that you do for
Yeah.
schools. And when I started there, it was shifting to a
Hmm.
preponderance of performances for schools
Yeah.
and fewer for families. And it wasn't because anybody had anything against families,
Hmm.
but simply because Toronto was then,
Hmm.
in 2002, 2003,
Hmm.
impossible to get anywhere
Yeah.
between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So doing an evening show during the week,
Hmm.
you couldn't get an audience because they couldn't get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so within a short period of time, we stopped evening performances altogether and
Right.
began to rely only on the weekends to
Yeah.
perform for families.
Yeah.
So I suppose the shift for in the company. And the thing that actually truly appealed to me was focusing on young people as real audiences, not practice audiences.
Yes,
We're teaching them how to become adult theater attendees.
Sure.
They are audiences in the here and now.
Yes, yeah.
And that was the focus of the work for me. And I got to be part of that transition, I guess, from what YPT had been before, which was this family/school audiences theater.
Yeah, I mean, in the 80s when I worked there quite a bit, it was main stage season and 2 or 3 touring shows a year. I mean, it was really a substantial player in the Toronto theater community. And
absolutely.
I know, and that changed, and it changed. Well, the world changes, right? And with schools, when schools are driven by bus schedules, or when certainly at the secondary school level, when people are told you can no longer take your students out of the school because it's you're losing precious teaching time,
class time.
Yeah,
as if there's no teaching happening at the theater.
Oh, exactly. Of course.
Yeah. Okay. It's insulting.
Yeah. I want to ask one last thing because we're getting close to saying thank you. So you stepped down from YPT a few years ago, right?
2021.
Okay. And can you capsulize life after YPT, after PTE, and having the great move east, where you are now? What I know you'd like to act, so that's good to know.
Yes, listen, world,
exactly.
He wants to act,
exactly,
and I want to direct, and I've been directing a little bit since I left. I've been getting some work, which is great.
Yeah,
I stepped down because I felt that because I stayed a long time, and longer than I would have intended. The only other thing I wanted to do was run a theater school.
Right.
And the opportunity came and I couldn't because Aaron's health wasn't in a good place at that time. And so there was no way to take on a new job and navigate that as well.
Sure.
So I ended up staying almost 20 years, which, when I spoke about my time at Prairie Theatre Exchange and thinking, okay, 7 years it's time to go.
Yeah.
I contravened that by staying so long. And and seeing how the world had evolved and changed, I felt it was really important for me to get out of the frickin' way.
Yeah.
And let other people have that really, really great job.
Yeah.
And I suppose allow the company to change however it needed to. Because, when you stay in one place and you're doing I'm going to say pretty good job, and people seem to like what you're doing. The board likes you, it's all great, but you have to step back and remember the company has started to form a bit around you and your taste and how you do things. And maybe you're holding it back from branching out, from evolving in some ways. So I felt really strongly that, once I was 65 and I was going to be able to get a pension, because as you know, there's no pension in the arts. So I felt, okay, at 65, it's time for me to go and do other things and freelance. I'm doing a lot of volunteer work. I'd say periodically I feel a bit like I'm using one half of my brain in the volunteer work that I'm doing. That's largely about leadership and coordination and that sort of stuff. And I'm not getting to use the creative side as much.
Sure.
So I feel like I'm leaning when I walk. But I think what it affords me is a maybe the opportunity to be an observer and be somebody that could offer some commentary on, and I've done that as a mentor in a couple of situations where with my experience, I can bring a view that might be helpful.
Of course.
So I've really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed the mentoring.
Yeah.
That's happened.
Yeah, and that's also a natural fit for you as a teacher.
Oh yeah,
that's what teachers. I mean, at their best, that's what teachers can give. Alan, this has been a terrific conversation, and it's so much fun to know somebody, and then to realize how little you know about that person. And these, an extended conversation like this is the only way that can happen. It certainly doesn't happen in the rehearsal room or in a production meeting or anything.
Or in a noisy opening night party.
Well, there's that too. That's true. So again, thank you very much for making the time and for being so available. And I want to thank all of you who are listening and asking, as I always do, for you to share this episode and every other episode with people you know, to follow us. And as we move along and start thinking about Series 3, we'll need your support because there are no sponsors and it's not an advertised-based podcast, as you know. So contributions are really gratefully accepted, and you can do that in Canada by e-transfer to Jerica Life in Stages, JERICA Life in Stages at Rogers.com. And outside of the country, you would go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Life in Stages, and the instructions there are very clear. Thank you for considering that, and thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to having more guests as we proceed through Series 2. Bye-bye.